for joining us. I'm Josh Goldstein. Before I talk more about me and why I'm here with you, let's talk about a place. A place you might know as Cinderella City Mall. You're probably aware that Cinderella City was a shopping center here in Englewood, Colorado, located at the intersection of Hamden and Santa Fe. But you might not know that Cinderella City was never intended for that location. In fact, it was originally designed for a different parcel of land at Hamden and University. The man with the plan was this guy, Jerry Von Frelick. He was a real estate developer from Texas. He was previously bankrupt, starting fresh in Colorado. He developed Lakeside, which was one of our first partially enclosed malls in 1956, and this allowed him to pay off his debts. He planned many more malls in the Denver metro area. In 1960, he proposed his second shopping center in Colorado for the KLZ Radio Tower property on East Hamden. The project code name at the time was Cinderella City. He said, the architectures of the Georgetown, Colorado era, the time of the gold and silver camps, the entire area, landscape minus the signs, is designed to blend like a park into the surrounding community. There was enormous opposition to this idea. Cherry Hills and Englewood residents hated the idea of a shopping center in their neighborhood. There's a woman in the back that's holding a sign that says, roses are red, violets are blue, Cinderella City, I hate you. And this gentleman up front has beautiful abstract art and says, as abstract as Cinderella City. The Downtown Englewood Development Committee was also against this shopping center, as were existing outdoor shopping centers like Cherry Creek and University Hills, for obvious reasons. In September of 1960, he announced that he intended to build the mall regardless of opposition, because he said 3 years of surveys show that's the place a regional shopping center is needed and should be located. This is what project code name Cinderella City looked like in 1961. Nothing like what we got, although you can see a hint of a large central atrium space there on the upper right. Most of the crowd of 300 people laughed and jeered when Von Frelick told City Council, I think the people in Englewood and Arapahoe County want this shopping center in their city and county. Got to admire his resolve. Between 1960 and 1962, there were several protracted court battles, and eventually City Council killed the idea of Cinderella City. Von Frelick decided it was time to move forward. He shed the image, created a new, more modern architectural style. Meanwhile, that original concept, sort of classical gardens, was recycled for Villa Italia, which ended up opening a few years later in Lakewood in 1966. For Von Frelick's team, it was back to the drawing board. They had a new site in mind, Commerce Park, or City Park, at Hamden and Santa Fe, about 2 miles west. They had to create a new layout for the shopping mall to keep their 1 million square feet they had planned for the previous parcel. This was a different shape and a different size, so they had to do some creative thinking. They also had to add a 2-level parking deck around the entire shopping center to support all of the required parking. Of course, there was more opposition to this site as well. The city park was a huge asset to the Englewood community. There were 2 coalitions formed to save the park versus New Englewood. The rezoning ended up passing on a 5-2 vote, but 20% of the citizens petitioned, triggering an obscure 3/4 vote requirement. This went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in 1965, the High Court backed Von Frelick's shopping center on the Englewood site. At this time, the Cinderella City design was evolving. In the upper left there, you can see what would eventually become the Blue Mall, or the central atrium, the theater there in the center, and an aerial rendering of the entire shopping center at the bottom. The shape remained, but we didn't quite get that kind of architecture. At this time, Von Frelick was actually operating out of Villa Italia with a huge leasing push, and it says here, New Englewood will open on March 7th, 1968. Although prime space is being leased daily, a number of truly choice locations remain. One can be the location for you. During my research on this project, I found that there was a 17-story hotel planned for Cinderella City called the Cinderella Hotel, and it was designed between 2 anchor stores or department stores, and on the plans it was noted simply as future expansion. Luckily, there's a gentleman named Ed Pease. He was the engineer for Cinderella City from beginning to end, and I met with him, and he gave me this amazing drawing here. Otherwise, I would have never known about the hotel. Groundbreaking happened on March 31st, 1966, an entire 6 years after Cinderella City was first conceived. The city of Englewood issued a $10 million building permit, the largest in its history. Von Frelick paid the city $1 million for 11, quote, smaller and safer parks around Englewood, which we enjoy today. At the time, Von Frelick was known as a one-man building boom. Here he is looking over Denver's biggest hole in the ground. And indeed, it was a big hole in the ground. There's the site after they removed the park in the upper left, and you can see some foundation work happening for the parking structure on the right. Just for scale, here's a picture of the development team visiting the site shortly after some of the first columns came out of the ground. Here's some other shots of the actual mall building as it started coming into verticality. Some more shots of the shopping center in 1967. At some point, they finished the parking deck enough that they could actually park their vehicles on it while they finished the rest of the mall. This place really was designed for scale. It had 5 color-coded sub-malls, the first being Blue Mall in the center. Rose Mall was on the west side on the main level, Shamrock Mall down below that. There was also Gold Mall on the main level on the east side, and below that was something called Sunflower Mall, but it later became something known as Cinder Alley. This huge shopping center also featured a cinema, a Newsteaders, Denver Dry Goods, JCPenney, Joslin's, and Woolworths. And I've noticed on several of the drawings, the rooftop was noted as future expansion areas. So Cinderella City was actually intended to be even bigger. In particular, the Blue Mall was a fascinating place. In addition to serving as a meeting and resting place, Von Frolic thought the Central Plaza would serve as a gigantic magnet, attracting trade shows and other events from the entire area. He also developed Cinderella City around columns because he said the colonnade has the effect of making malls wider than they are, in fact. He was less interested in architectural aesthetics than utility and, ironically, the avoidance of obsolescence. He chose exterior wall materials that could be changed as tastes changed. Unfortunately, the mall never lived long enough to see that happen. On March 7, 1968, Cinderella City opened to the public. At the time, it was known as New Englewood, the Cinderella City. 1 million visitors were expected for the grand opening celebrations, and this also shattered Englewood traffic records. Joslin's wasn't yet complete on the east side. You can see it there on the left. You'll also notice that there's a conspicuous hole in the ground where the lower parking opens up, and there doesn't seem to be any barricade or fencing there, so this was certainly in the days before OSHA. Elmer Schwab, the Englewood mayor at the time, said, "This is the greatest moment ever in Englewood history, an Alice in Wonderland come true." At some point, there was a fountain countdown where Von Frelic's wife pulls the switch on the 35-foot Blue Mall fountain. This was just a soft opening, 107 stores, and a second grand opening was planned in July. This place really was for Englewood, by Englewood. In the floors of the Rose and Gold malls, handprints and busts were embossed in the concrete from 27 dignitaries who helped bring the shopping center to life. As well, many tenants were Englewood-based local small businesses. It was such a big deal that the Rocky Mountain News had an entire Cinderella City section. In that, various tenants were posting photos of their new locations. Even the general contractor got in on the fun, with W.R. Grimshaw, the prime general contractor, saying they're proud of the part they've had in building this spectacular and beautiful complex, the Cinderella City. Even the air conditioning equipment got a cameo in the newspapers just for its sheer size to support a building of this scale. It wasn't just the mall. There was also an east complex, 2 new bank towers, the skyscrapers of Englewood, King Soopers, a brand new King Soopers and a Wyatt's cafeteria, and City Hall was across the laddie as well. Joslin's opened in October of 1968, several months after the mall opened. This was a flagship location designed by an architect named Richard Crowther. Back when department stores had restaurants, Joslin's featured a very nice one with a bunch of aspen trees planted in it. You can see them there on the lower left. The shoe area also had Colorado-inspired themes as well as sort of mountain wildflower themes for the salon and other retail areas. This mall was a colorful record breaker. At 1.2 million square feet of leasable area across those 5 malls, it was, when it first opened for a hot minute, the largest in the world. Then it became the largest in the US, and then it became the largest west of the Mississippi. By 1970, it sported 213 tenants, 31,000 visitors per day. It employed 3,500 people on a $2 million monthly payroll. By 1974, Cinderella City accounted for a whopping 52% of Englewood's revenue. The newspapers saw the shopping center as a big payoff, a city within a city offering variety. Cinderella City was exciting and a landmark for the city of Englewood. In fact, the newspapers had an ongoing series called All Around Cinderella City, where they would interview merchants and shoppers around the mall and organized it by those sub-malls. So there was On the Blue Mall, rambling down the Rose Mall, gliding down Gold Mall, strolling down Shamrock Lane, and Cinder Alley. Been through any good alleys lately? Speaking of Cinder Alley, it was a brand new concept. It opened in 1971, replacing the original mall, Sunflower Mall. This was inspired by Old England with sidewalks, gas lamps, and local artisans. It was, I would say, a precursor to today's hyper-local marketplace trend, sort of ahead of its time. Cinder Alley includes nearly 50 specialty and artisan shops covering 37,000 square feet of space where artists and craftsmen can sell their handmade wares, said the Rocky Mountain News in 1977. Because of its old English mood and flavor, Cinder Alley has become the in place for meeting friends and shopping. This place was also more than a mall. In fact, it had an outpost of the Englewood High School called the City Campus on the third floor. The Denver Post said the center is probably the only such complex in the world that has its own high school classrooms, with 310 pupils attending Englewood School's City Campus on the office level. Von Frelick in 1970 said brick and mortar will fall from this building someday, but the idea of City Campus will long outlive anything I build. Cinderella City also featured a modeling school down in Cinder Alley called Barbizon School of Modeling, which had a faculty of 19 professionals, causing this newspaper to call it another small business success story. Cinderella City was also mixed use ahead of its time. It featured 120,000 square feet of offices above the Rose and Blue malls. I've highlighted them there in red. This included tenants like Martin Marietta, Chevron, Texaco, various insurance offices, banks, salons, medical and dental offices, and that EHS campus. Cinderella City was a fun place. It hosted a variety of community events, including concerts. Look at how many people you can fit in that blue mall. It also featured plays, an entire stage set, plus a huge crowd, chorus and symphonies, cheerleading events, statewide science fairs and conferences, and competitions, this one here being the world's largest strawberry shortcake. As Von Frelick predicted, Cinderella City also attracted trade shows. Here's sailboats for 1978, four-wheel drive vehicles in the Rose Mall. It also invited art shows like the Aesthetic Encounter Fine Art Show in the Blue Mall and something called Milestones of America on Shamrock Mall. It also had something called the Fall Fun Fest, which featured zany events like trampolines and an indoor ski slope and skis on a trampoline, because why not? It also featured children's boxing down in Cinder Alley. It also hosted indoor sports like miniature golf, horseshoes, and tennis practice. However, by 1978, only 10 years after it opened, the mall was starting to show signs of age. It started to feel a little dark. Various fixtures were burnt out and not replaced very quickly. The plans had all died by this point, and the design was feeling rather dated. There were deeper issues, structural concerns, especially at JCPenney. When asked if the JCPenney store had been in danger of collapse, the inspecting engineer responded, "It would be wise to shore it up." How's that for evading your question? While I did my research, I also came across a photo during demolition showing a column sagging and sinking into the ground. That typically doesn't happen during demolition, so that was probably a sign that the mall had some structural problems. Anybody who's been there probably remembers the parking garage, another physical part of the mall that was decaying rapidly. In fact, at one point, they had to make emergency repairs to 9 critical areas with 22 sets of shoring. Von Frelick said at the time that the problems came from a design that could have been stronger, expansion and contraction from the summer and winter thermal cycles, and heavy snow removal equipment. Those weren't the only problems that Cinderella City was facing. Crime was rampant at the mall. These articles here talk about a decrease in the complaints and improvements between customers and merchants and security. But if you look at the lower left, it lists the things that were happening: robberies, thefts, auto thefts, assaults. Not to mention, shopping malls generally were in a financial slump due to the shaky economy of the 1970s and early 1980s. This caused Von Frelick to sell his interest for $35 million in 1978. At the time, he said, "I didn't plan to sell it when we put it together, but I'm selling it because the management and continuing expense is more of a problem than I really want to take on at this point." He sold it to a company called Kravco, and they said that when we purchased Cinderella City, it was in a bad state of decomposition. It needed a facelift to be competitive in the market, and that's what they did. Between 1981 and 1985, Cinderella City underwent a 3-phase, $15 million renovation. For one thing, Blue Mall lost its fountain, but it gained a food court in the basement. Rose Mall got openings in the floors to allow sunlight to trickle down into Shamrock Mall, which was certainly dark, and it also got new skylights. Generally, the mall received warmer materials, including parquet floors covering up the raw concrete that was part of the mall's original design, and all of those busts and handprints. The malls were no longer painted with colors, but the names did remain. This added about 60,000 square feet and brought this mall to 275 total stores. The vice president of development of Kravco said in 1983, "To compete in any market, you have to create a stimulating environment. bring in 1980s concepts, and that's what they did. Here's Rose Mall's concept sketch from before the renovation, and here's a photograph from after the renovation, almost a perfect match. Some of the changes were actually aborted, according to my research. I have the original blueprints from the renovation, and it looked like they were going to fill in various small entrance corridors with stores. And instead, they did nothing. They didn't fill them in the stores, and they also didn't add new flooring, change the lighting, or update any of the storefronts. This was sort of a quirky decision by the renovation team. In 1985, the final phase occurred. They demolished Newsteaders and the cinema, which were an interesting small pair of anchors on the southwest corner of the site. The Newsteaders was actually quite a nice store. You can see it getting demolished there. It was very well articulated and it had a great spiral staircase, but that didn't save it. It was replaced with a big Broadway Southwest, later May D&F, later Foley's, and that's actually the building that we're in right now. This did provide a much needed shot in the arm for aging Cinderella City. Community events were back. There's a parade coursing through the Blue Mall, family entertainment here in front of Montgomery Ward, fashion shows in the Blue Mall. At the time, the assistant city manager of Englewood, Peter Vargas, said, "I'm pleasantly surprised. We seem to be on a positive trend." And the newspapers were heralding this as a renovation that lifted Englewood. They also added a handcrafted Italian carousel in the Blue Mall. You can see it there on the right. It was so good, in fact, at Cinderella City that somebody got married in the mall. However, stubborn issues persisted. By the time Cinderella City got renovated, new malls were on the scene, including South Glen and Southwest Plaza. And the layout was inherently problematic. That huge M shape, it was pretty difficult to navigate, and the lower levels were pretty uninviting down there, tucked below the parking deck. In fact, some retail analysts called it an insult to retail design. By the early 1990s, it was clear that Cinderella City was not out of the woods. Here's a great article in Westward by Michael Roberts, Schemes from the Mall, and his quote that I like here is, "The corridors are quiet, too quiet." In 1991, the Denver Post called Cinderella City a stepsister. They said that when it was built, it was the hottest thing in town, but as suburban malls proliferated, it was squeezed from all sides, and its immediate area isn't that affluent. By 1993, the rumor was out that Cinderella City might get put up for sale. It all came crashing down in 1994 as anchors jumped ship. First, it was Foley's in January. Then it was Penny's in March. By August, Joslin's announced that they were leaving the premises. This means that 75% of the department stores were now closed, causing the Rocky Mountain News to call Cinderella City forlorn and slumbering. In 1995, the Denver Post said there's a spooky feel to the mall's interior, where empty chairs and closed-up stores give the 1.2 million square foot Hulk the feel of a commercial ghost town. It did not look good for Cinderella City. By 1995, only 4 tenants remained, with Wells Music, the owner of Wells Music, saying, "It's eerie in here. We're in a mall that's a tomb." This forced Englewood's hand and got them serious about redevelopment. At this point, Cinderella City was 95% vacant, and Englewood started putting together redevelopment plans. But budget constraints are a problem, as they are with most large projects, and this forced them to consider many iterations of possible redevelopment plans for Cinderella City. By 1996, most public areas of the mall were completely inaccessible. Englewood ended up acquiring the site and finalized a redevelopment plan. Montgomery Ward was the very last retailer to leave in December of 1997, closing Cinderella City's doors forever. Demolition was set to begin in 1998. That brings us to the countdown to demolition. In my research, I found that the Colorado Historical Society actually considered Cinderella City eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. But it didn't matter. On August 21st, 1998, demolition commenced in front of a crowd of hundreds, with the wrecking ball starting with the JCPenney Auto Center. And this article here says it's the end of an era as wrecking ball meets mall. Cinderella City lasted just past its 30th birthday, not very long for a building of this scale. LVI Environmental Services said that Cinderella City is a big job. We'll be sending 2 to 3 million pounds of structural steel and 2 million pounds of concrete reinforcing bars to the recycler. This place really was embedded in Englewood in more ways than one. In fact, demolition included providing shoring for a laddie and Hampton so that when the parking deck was demolished, the street didn't simply collapse into the site. Here is a time lapse of Cinderella City getting demolished. This was a very, very large site, a lot of concrete, a lot of material. They started on the east side. It starts over now. You can see Joslin's hangs around for a little while. I think there were some contract negotiations going on and they demolished it and moved on to the rest of the mall. On the left there is the Broadway Southwest, which they did end up keeping. I'll let it run through one more time because it's just so cool. And there it goes. The year 2000 was the year that the Englewood City Center rose from the ashes of Cinderella City. The redevelopment features residential, office, and retail space in a Walmart. This was one of the nation's first transit-oriented developments with an RTD light rail connection. And of course, that Broadway Southwest building was saved and adapted into the Englewood Civic Center. Now, it's time to talk about the impact that this place had on me and why I'm doing what I call the Cinderella City Project. In 1998, this is what I looked like, and this is what Cinderella City looked like. My parents, probably not intentionally, drove me past the demolition site, and I took notice of Cinderella City getting demolished. First of all, I don't think I had seen a demolition site ever, and I'd certainly never seen one of this scale. And the fact that I could peer into the darkness of the mall, just sort of, it's almost frightening. My parents told me what an amazing, opulent place this used to be. I was shocked. In fact, I remembered, after realizing that this was the same place, my mom took me down in Shamrock Mall in the basement. And I think that she was after some late season deals at Montgomery Ward right before it closed in December of 1997. And she dragged me along, and I remember we parked in the underground parking structure, and we walked through Shamrock Mall, and it felt like a dark, endless corridor, very creepy. There was nothing open except for Montgomery Ward way at the end, and we both felt pretty unsafe. But even then, I knew there was probably more to the story of this place than what meets the eye. What really got me was, how did this place go from this to this in only 30 years? So I started doing some research. Kudos to the city of Englewood. They actually maintained a website in 1998, very progressive, showing demolition photos, historic photos of the mall, and a bunch of historic facts about it. So I was able to really understand what this place was like, what it looked like. As any good 8-year-old has, I had a set of Legos, and I started exploring structural grids. I was sort of bent on recreating the structural system that I saw in Cinderella City. At some point, I taught myself 3D modeling. I realized I had a burgeoning interest in architecture, probably thanks to the mall. I made some really, truly awful first attempts at rebuilding Cinderella City way back then. In high school, I had an internship working at Alberta Development on the South Glen redevelopment process. I documented the demolition of the old South Glen Mall. I learned about site logistics and development, and thankfully, I learned proper 3D modeling for client presentations. In 2013, I graduated from Kansas State University with my Master of Architecture degree. I made projects of all sorts of scales, but I also had a thesis in particular that was an adaptive reuse of a dilapidated school building into a public park, which I thought was very interesting. In 2013 to 2015, I got some real-world experience at a company called 505 Design, where I designed mixed-use shopping centers around the world. Some of them were renovations of existing centers, others were brand new construction. I even came full circle and worked on the streets of South Glen again. Today, I work at a software company called Autodesk. I'm building the next generation of 3D modeling for architects, and I am the senior product owner of a piece of software called Formit, and I am managing the development direction, and I'm also building and testing new features, and I'm even writing code. So I'm actually having a direct impact on our software, making it better to use for architects around the world. I consider myself now sort of a fictional architect. I'm designing modern buildings with modern software, but I don't have to answer to a client, which is very nice. I can validate all the new features and workflows as a real designer would. In particular, I'm interested in adaptive reuse, that is the saving and reusing of old buildings into new uses. A few years ago, I did a study on Flood Middle School. I think some of you in the crowd actually went to Flood Middle School, which is very exciting. I felt that they could have saved that building. It had a lot of history, and they could have done something really interesting with it. And I did a proposal of that, showing what walk-up townhomes and some retail could have looked like if somebody would have had some money to spend, but they didn't, and they tore it down. Similarly, I'm doing a study about the Englewood Civic Center, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. It seemed to me that Cinderella City was the next logical step, the next 3D model that I could work on. It has a lot of complex geometry. It has an angled site, has a lot of intricate details, ample materials. Cinderella City is now improving our software from beyond the grave. Over the last 5 years since I started working on this, we've fixed hundreds of bugs directly attributed to Cinderella City. We've also made huge performance gains because each era of the model, I have two of them, one for the 1960s and 70s and one for the 80s and 90s. Each one of those is millions of polygons, 30,000 or more components, 300 materials, 600 megabytes. It's huge. The recreation process started from humble beginnings. Here is a massing model of Cinderella City. Eventually, I added the internal structure. I layered in some interior detailing. And I added some exterior detailing as well. I even went so far as to add light fixtures, flags, handrails, signage. At some point, it occurred to me that the model was detailed enough to be used for another purpose. I've always wanted to learn a video game engine, and of course, I've always wanted to write code. So I wrote some code to automate the import of assets from our 3D modeling application into Unity. And I basically took the model from this to this to this. And this is in 2019, so this was a few years ago. It's only gotten better. Back then, in 2019, the last time I stood on this stage, I was on version 0.4, which may not mean much to you, but this was basically my way of tracking my progress. At this time, there was only the 1980s and 90s version of them all. There was no time traveling whatsoever, no user interface. You were just dropped into the center court. There were no animated elements, and it was my very first generation of code, which now that I look back on, I'm a little embarrassed by. Since then, it's made leaps and bounds. In 2020, during the pandemic, I decided to take all that downtime and build out the 1960s and 70s era. I added the ability to time travel between the two, which is actually very difficult. There are a lot of nuances there. I added user interface elements like a loading screen and a main menu. Last year, I added animated people, plants and trees, an animated fountain, and drastically improved the performance. And just earlier this year, I added historic photographs in the 3D space, a ton of new stores and new details, a realistic sky in both of the eras. And I've also added some audio and visual settings and a credits screen for all the folks who have helped me along the way. Tonight, I'm going to show you version 0.7.2, which is everything here plus some other bug fixes and quality of life enhancements. And with that, if you're all ready, it's time to time travel. All right, here we go. So I've got here the main menu, and this is, again, one of the more recent things I did. So now I can actually start off anywhere inside of the virtual mall that I want. I have all of these waypoints, if you will. And the way this interface is set up, it's designed to show how the mall changed at first glance. So you can see the 1960s and 70s here with Blue Mall, and the later version of that, and same with like the food court, didn't exist in the 70s, so this is just a parking garage. Let's jump in and let's go to the Blue Mall. So here we are. This is the beautiful Blue Mall. I've got a lot of plants in here. Those people are walking around. I've got those hanging planters. These were apparently imports from Italy. Very special. Of course, I've got that animated fountain. I've got a guy sitting here in front of the fountain, some people talking. I've added furniture. Got some people sitting here, not doing much. And I'm going to sort of run around a little bit. So here is the first place I'd like to do a little time traveling. So you'll notice that there's this staircase and some plants below it. Now, if I time travel, this actually becomes a store. They've added framed impressions. This is a special store. I actually partnered with somebody on Instagram named Katie Neese. She makes really cool 1980s art. So I decided to put some of her art inside of framed impressions. So these are actually from the future, 2019. But I thought it was a cool homage to an Instagram friend. So here is the Blue Mall in 1980, in the 1980s and 1990s. Obviously, the fountain is gone. You can see the food court is down there. We'll get there momentarily. A couple of stores shoved underneath the walkways here. In particular, Foot Locker was added. And if I go and time travel back to the 1970s when it looked really nice, this was the Denver, not Montgomery Ward. And of course, there's no Foot Locker here. Kind of amazing that they shoved all that new square footage underneath an existing stair. Let's take one more look at the fountain. I've got a gentleman here standing, and the reason is I plan to allow people to call a phone number and record memories, audio memories, and I will eventually apply them to people like this. So maybe this guy will have a chat bubble above his head, and you'll get close and you'll hear a real memory from a real person who experienced maybe the fountain at Cinderella City. All right, let's take a walk. I'm going to run, actually. We'll go underneath here. There were these sort of short hallways that bound the Blue Mall, and I put some various stores in here. This was Rich Burger, was actually a really early tenant. It later became Taco Bueno, and if I time travel, you'll see it actually became Arby's much later. Here is that Foot Locker again, tucked underneath that staircase. And if I time travel, everything changes. Here's the original Musicland. Very nice little logo they've got. Bags and Gems store. And over here, it's interesting, there's a lot of exposed brick walls, especially along the anchor stores. So this is the Denver Dry Goods building, and there's just nothing really going on here. It's just a big, wide concourse, no stores on either side. And of course, in the 1980s, I think they intended to fix that by shoving a bunch of stores along those walls. So on the right, I've got these tiny little stores, and this one will move out of my way. These, I don't really know what they were. I just have a photo. During demolition, I know that they added like a green canopy, but I'm not really sure what was here. It's pretty ugly, to be honest, so I'm going to go back to the 1970s. Here's Russell Stover and a place called Carousel Snack Bar. And just for fun, I'm going to go down. This is one of those side hallways that was going to be filled in with a store, and they didn't. So when I time travel, you'll see not a lot changed. They still have the old flooring in here. This is the back of KG Men's Store, and it gets kind of sad and desolate back here. This was a mall entrance, but there just wasn't much going on. Now, if I time travel, this gets a little bit more lively. There was a Leader Western Store, Lerner Shops, Dardano's Leather Shop, and there was even a staircase here that they removed at some point during the renovation because the basement level changed considerably. All right, let's stay in this beautiful era, and let's head over to Rose Mall. And you can hear I've got some music piping through the speakers. Licensing is a problem. I would love to have some classic rock playing or, mall music, but a lot of it's licensed, so I just have to get with some Instagram folks and say, hey, can I use your music in my video game? So this is all original music. Morrow's Nut House, Dunbar Jewelers, Randall's Formal Wear, Brightone Camera. Some of these are old brands that you might recognize. Over here, we've got some signage telling you that Rose Mall is up ahead and Shamrock Mall is down below. There's this little store here called Etc. I learned from that engineer Ed Pease that actually before Etc. showed up, this was a bakery, and it seems pretty small for a bakery, but actually they had a conveyor belt that would go up to the second level so that they could bake the goods up there and transport them down here for sale. I wish that I had a photograph of that because I would totally rip out Etc. for that. All right, we are in the Rose Mall. Here is the Denver facing into Rose Mall, and this is Rose Mall with its beautiful hanging planters. Here is KG Men's Store. My mom actually worked there for a while. And if I time travel, you'll see things change considerably, even for KG Men's. They got a brand new storefront. Up here, up these stairs, is the office area. So that was actually where the Englewood High School City campus was, right up there. All right, we're back in the 1970s. Let's cruise through here. So there was Kohl's, the bookstore, the Book People, Pontius Shoes, Richmond Brothers, and I've got these seating areas here embedded in the columns. And if I time travel, you'll see that those go away. Oh, and I've got some code in here that prevents me from falling because sometimes you can time travel and the floor disappears below you like it did here. So I made sure that the player doesn't just fall when that happens. Let's go back in time. Here's KG Bootery, Lerner Shops. We've got Tom McCann, and we've got Woolworths here. I'm going to push this guy out of my way. So Woolworths changed a little bit. I'll go forward in time, 20 years. Woolworths was still there, but they did take some of its space for other stores like Afterthoughts. And let's see. So you can see all of the flags that they added here in Rose Mall and the openings down on the floor and the skylights. I even added trash cans and little trees and planters, so I'm trying to get a lot of details in here to make it feel realistic. I've even got gloss on the floors so that you see some reflections. All right, let's head over here. So there's a store called Lily Rubin, and if I time travel backwards, that was still there, had a different looking storefront. Oh, and this is something I wanted to mention. So there's a new feature I added. Let me get prepared here. So I have a new visibility menu where I can turn off things like ceilings and floors. I actually just use that to get interesting views of the mall, but really what I'm here for is historic photographs. So I have a historic photograph right here of Cricket and Vogue. So I have kind of a fun little move here where you can see that turning into the real model. I thought that adding an exhibit within an exhibit would be a pretty cool idea, so I decided to do it. All right, so we've got Box here, and we've got some other stores, this one called The Regiment. Now, if I time travel, this would have been a place I would probably be found at the mall, KB Toys. I don't have anything inside of these stores. You'll notice they're all empty. Somebody asked, will you put merchandise in the stores? It's already taken me 5 years to get this long, to get this far. So I don't see that happening, but maybe I'll throw some photos to the stores in there if I have them. But yeah, for right now, they're probably going to remain empty. There were stores called Fashion Bug, Summit Stationers, Hit or Miss here in the 1980s. And we're coming up upon, here's Floorshine Shoes. They were there from beginning to end. They didn't change much. We're now at the end of Rose Mall. And here is the Newsteaders on the left. And also apparently there was like a mall entrance here and a stair and an elevator. Now, I'm going to talk about what changed here in just a moment, but let me walk outside and show you the fruits of my labor, getting a realistic sky into this simulation. Here is the Cinderella City Cinema, and there is the Newsteaders building. Now, if I time travel, we will be inside of the Broadway Southwest. This is the building that we're in right now. In fact, we are in this corner, and I am standing something like right here looking out at all of you. All right, so that's Broadway Southwest, and let me go back out into Rose Mall. Earlier, we were in a different room, in the community room, and it was actually right here, and I noted that you could look out of the windows and you would see Rose Mall, but of course not anymore. So this was the new development, the new Broadway Southwest, and if I time travel, you'll see how it changed. There is actually a balcony up there. That whole Rose Mall balcony covers this entire area, and it was probably for future expansion areas, but since that never happened, really not much was up there except offices. Okay, let's head down to Shamrock Mall. I don't have the escalators running, so I'm just going to walk down these like stairs. All right, Shamrock Mall, here we are. Very green, building on that Shamrock theme. I don't have a lot of photos of this area, so I just know that the common areas were green, the floor was green. But if I time travel, you'll see what changed. They ended up covering all the floors with bricks, and they added these nice planters. Here's another woman talking to no one in particular. She'll eventually have a story to tell. And I can peer up into the Rose Mall, just like they intended. And there's a guy enjoying looking into the void. All right, so we've got Mile High Hobbies here, and the lower level of Woolworths was actually something known as J. Branham, which was a Woolworths sub-brand. But if I go back in time, that becomes Woolworths again, nice and glassy. And there was a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant called Tommy Wong's, that some of you might remember. So I threw that in there because I actually had a photograph of it. In the 1980s, when they did the renovation, they actually kicked Tommy Wong's out of their spot. And they said, we need to put a mall entrance there. So this became a mall entrance. Now, Tommy Wong's ended up reformatting and became Paul Wu's in the food court. It's the same family, so I'll get there here in a little bit. Okay, so we've got an American Waterbed and Furniture Company. Probably a good idea to keep that in the basement. In Shamrock Mall, there were a lot of empty storefronts. It never seemed to lease well. The basement areas, probably not a surprise, didn't lease very well. This guy's in my way. So we've got some blank walls here where stores should have been, and if I time travel, these actually are still mostly empty, although I did have a photo of a little kitty store here called ABC Kitty Shop, so I added that. But a lot of these stores are empty, not because they were vacant, but because I just don't have any photographs of them, so I'm trying not to lie, I'm trying not to make stuff up, so if I don't have a photograph of it, I won't build it. But everything else I do have a photograph of, anything you see here. So there's a store called Candles. And again, we can peer up into Rose Mall there. This is the last area, last opening in the floor. I don't know, a store called Colorado 6 and Knock on Wood. And here's Montgomery Ward again. This is where things kind of get interesting because in the 1970s and in the 1960s, when the mall first opened, Shamrock Mall had this strange sort of zigzagging corridor. Again, I don't have any of these stores built. But what happened was, the two wings of Cinderella City, the basement wings, Shamrock Mall and Cinder Alley, did not connect. So if you were shopping down here in the basement and you wanted to go across to the other wing, in this case I'm in Shamrock and I want to go to Cinder Alley, you'd have to cut through the parking garage, probably avoiding some cars along the way. I think that in the renovation they realized that that wasn't good circulation design, so they changed it. So if I time lapse right here, I will be inside of a newly enclosed area where they extended Shamrock Mall and connected it to a new food court. So all of this was outside in the parking garage. It was a huge endeavor, covering all that stuff up, making it feel inhabitable. And I need to go back here and show everybody, I did build out a place you might recognize as Round the Corner. Now, Round the Corner was there to begin with. I just don't know what it looked like, and I really want to build it, but I think it would have been right here. So I don't want you to think I've forgotten it. It was definitely here, but I only have a photograph of it in this era. So let's take a look around. I'll stay in the 1980s here for a little while because it's the only thing of interest down here. There was a place called Sports Fan. And again, just for fun, I'll turn on the historic photographs here. I got a photograph of Sports Fan from a merchant at the mall, and I'm so glad he gave it to me because I would have had no idea what this area looked like, so I built this whole thing based on that. Veldkamp's Flowers was down here. Montgomery Ward, of course, the lower level. Now again, if I go back in time, you'll see that this was an exterior entrance to the Denver. It just opened right up into the parking garage. So I guess you can say that this was an improvement. There were some vacant storefronts here. These never got leased as far as I can tell, so it's just sort of a quiet, dead corner. Let's head into the food court. Here is the food court. Here's Chick-fil-A, and here's a photograph of Chick-fil-A. This was the first Chick-fil-A in the state, as far as I understand it. All right, let's walk this way. I don't have photos of these, but there were restaurants here. However, I do have a great photograph of Sbarro, and these people are all waiting for pizza, although I don't see any pizza. Coming around again, here is Paul Wu's Chinese food. Again, this is the same family that had Tommy Wong's, but they rebranded as more of a food court Chinese place called Paul Wu's. There was also, they added a little staircase back up to Blue Mall because they ended up taking other staircases out as part of the renovation. So Naturalizer Shoes, a Hallmark store, Walden Books, classic mall tenant. There's also something called the Underworld. But I'm going to go back under the Underworld. And let's go hang out here by JCPenney. I've got another floating photograph here. This is from the Englewood Chamber of Commerce. Apparently there was some event happening in front of JCPenney. Very cool. Unfortunately, I don't have those folks here, but I did build the space. Some more sort of empty storefronts, but right here we've got a classic tenant called Orange Julius. I really should have added the oranges in the display case here. I just haven't gotten to it. And there's also a place called Corn Dog. I think that one's self-explanatory. I've got some escalators here, not running at the moment, but you can peer up into the skylights of the Blue Mall. And again, just for fun, if I time travel, there would only be parking here. And you can actually hear the fountain again because I don't know how to make the fountain know that I'm underneath it, so you shouldn't hear it. The game just thinks you're within radius, so you should hear it. So we can hear the fountain. And there was a little entrance, a little Blue Mall entrance here for the people that parked underneath and wanted to get up quickly into the Blue Mall. Oh, here's a woman now. But I don't have a photograph of this, so I left it pretty much empty. She can use the door? Yeah. And if I time travel, you'll see that this changes completely. I think we'll be again in front of, oh, we're near Orange Julius. Okay, so it changed a lot. They spent a lot of money down here. I don't have any chairs yet. I do have the tables. All these things take time. What I learned, I'm going to be a rude mall patron and jump the wall here. I learned that this was the smoking area of the food court. So apparently people would come up here and light up and the smoke would just waft up into the skylights. Really nice. Okay. Let's keep on going. Again, I'm going to jump some walls. And again. So coming out of the food court, heading towards Cinderella, there was a cookie company here. I really wish I had those huge cookies in the display case, because that's what should be there. And Zizo's Magic Castle was down here. A very small little spot on the corner right by the parking garage entrance. And I'll show more of this soon. This was another really interesting area. They spent all this money, and they did all this work to create a narrow, winding, mostly empty corridor. I don't think these spaces were leased very well, at least according to the photographs that I have. Now, I'm going to time travel, but I'm going to go outside to do this really quick because things get weird. A lot was shifted over, a lot was changed. So let me time travel back to the 1960s and 70s. We're back in the parking. Cinder Alley sort of unceremoniously just ended at the parking garage. We're going to go through here, and we're going to see what it was like. Again, a long brick wall, a long empty wall here for Penny's old logo, which I just adore. Let's do a little time traveling here. I'm going to get situated. So here's Penny's opening up into Cinder Alley. And if I go forward in time, you'll see how much it changed. First of all, there's a directory in front of us, but they actually shifted this hallway over entirely. So again, if I go backwards, you'll see that hallway is up against the Penny's building. And in the 1980s, they completely refactored this. And now this hallway is over here. And they intentionally added more stores in front of JCPenney, but I don't think they were ever leased. So it just kind of looked like this. Okay. For Cinder Alley, I think we should go back to the 1970s because that was the heyday. So here are those gas street lamps. I built all of those. And I do have a photograph here. Boom, there's Cinder Alley with some real people. And I even built that little planter. There it is. So Cinder Alley, unfortunately, all of the signage for all of these stores, it's all super ornate. It's wrought iron. And it's a lot easier to build rectangles and slightly curvy things. Even these little details on the windows were, it's not easy to have to do all that work. So I haven't added any of the signage for Cinderella yet, but it's coming. Right here was an entrance into what I would call the alleys of Cinder Alley. So I don't have these built because I don't have very many photographs, but they were very narrow corridors, and all these stores here should be full of brick. But anyway, just lots of little alleyways. Someday I will build that out, and I'll have another presentation to show that. For now, there's another moment in time here that's probably worth showing, which is at this corner, a tenant took over some of these spaces that you might recognize. Here we go. Let's go forward 20 years. Fantastic Nathan's shows up here at the corner. I don't have anything built in here, so it's just a bunch of darkness. Pretty creepy, really. They did remove some of those storefronts, but they painted some of the other storefronts because Fantastic ended up taking up many stores worth of space. And another thing you'll notice, if I go back in time, the original Cinder Alley featured black ceiling tiles because they wanted to emulate a night on the town. And when they did the renovation, not only did they add Fantastics, but they also made all the ceiling tiles white. I think that the mall management was trying to get away from dark, dingy Cinder Alley and Cinderella City as a whole. Okay, let's go backwards in time because it's just more interesting. So here's just more brick storefronts from Cinder Alley. Again, I wish that I had more to show. Oh, and one interesting thing to note, and I know I've got some retail design professionals in the audience, that you don't typically do this in retail design. They stuck the elevator and stairs right in front of the entrance to Joslyn's. It was just the way that the plan worked out because Cinder Alley was sort of off access from Gold Mall. I think that at some point Joslyn said, hey, people don't even know our store is down there. You add a sign on the staircase so that people know that they have to round that to get to Joslyn's. Now let's head upstairs. All right. Upstairs we go. We are heading towards Gold Mall, and here is the upper level of Joslyn's. These people are probably having a great conversation. And Joslyn's had these planters hanging on the wall. I'm sorry, Gold Mall had these planters hanging on the wall, and everything was very gold, per the name. Here's Wells Music. Here is Wilson's Sporting Goods, Spencer Gifts. That's another classic mall tenant. And if I time travel, one of these became Electronics Boutique, so that's way ahead of our time in the 1960s and 70s. Gold Mall is probably one of my least filled out, so there's just a bunch of empty stores here, but I do have those seating areas built out, and of course these planters. These planters were actually underlit, so they had power coursing through them, which is pretty cool, pretty expensive. Here's Stewart's. A lot of you might remember Stewart's, and if I time travel forward, Stewart's is still there, but looks quite a bit different. A little more modern maybe, but also a lot more bland. The whole center is a lot more bland. And let me go back in time because again, I just think the old JCPenney's logo is so much better. Here are some photographs. Here's Penny's in the Gap, which I have both of those here, and Penny's here with that Cinder Alley sign. Yeah, they're just going to walk through them. So actually, just for fun, I'll turn those off. And here we are. So this is another strange, quirky detail of Cinderella City. Again, typically you want your main concourse to dump you into the department store, but they didn't do that here. Instead, if you were to run right into the wall, you'd hit a display case. This is just a Penny's display case. And instead, in order to access the entrance, you'd have to jog over about 50 feet and find your entrance to Penny's here. Once again, in the 1960s and 70s, lots of exposed brick, lots of empty walls, very wide corridors. So here's again that Stewart's. There's a display case here in Flag Brothers, and if I time travel, you'll notice everything on the right gets filled in with little stores. And this is another one of those entrance corridors that they chose not to renovate at all. So you can see the parquet floor changes into the original mall's exposed concrete. Let me time travel backwards, back to the 1960s and 70s. We've got Flag Brothers here, Caramel Corn, and at the end is something you'll all recognize as Radio Shack, and I've got Franz Hummel's Delicatessen here. I've even added, not much, but I have added the counter for Franz Hummel's and a little bit of an indication of where Mr. Hummel himself would stand and take your order. But it's going to be a while before I get to that kind of detail. Place called Smoker's Inn, yes, a tobacco store here in Cinderella City, and I actually had a fan reach out and email me a photograph of his father's print shop, Ralph Baldwin Printer, so I added that. And if I time travel here, this all changed quite a bit. There was a wig boutique, and there was a Regis hairstylist there. Now, let me go outside because I want to show a couple things. Out here in the parking, I just want to show that I added what I call an anti-gravity mode. This was actually a request from somebody who was running the simulation and wanted to make a YouTube video, and he said, I really want to show it from up above. And I said, well, it's like walking around a mall. Like you have to walk on the ground. But he's like, you should add an anti-gravity mode. So I did. So you can go all the way up as far as you want, and I'm just going to show for fun. You can also fall slowly, and it's going to take us right through the parking deck down into the lower level. There's not a whole lot to show down here except for these interesting bundled columns. You all might remember Cinderella City was full of these very wide bundles of columns, sometimes 4 at a time, and this is because the parking deck was separated into smaller sections so that expansion and contraction didn't affect it as much, although how well that worked in practice is questionable. Let's just take a quick stroll through here. So eventually I'd like to add parking striping, maybe cars. I don't know. It seems like a lot of work, but it would be cool. So let's turn anti-gravity mode back on and let's rise through. And here is another sweet moment, the Cinderella City sign and the City of Englewood sign, and something called Western Federal Savings. And I just think that this corner of the mall in particular is a really nice example of the architecture Von Frelick was going for. The place looked good, especially at dusk. I decided to make the 1960s and 70s era at dusk. It just seemed right. But if I time travel, it doesn't age so well. And they got rid of the sweet signage. Just a lot of moves that are kind of questionable. Okay, so one last thing I want to show very quickly. We'll head to the main menu. I've got a lot of places here, making sure I didn't miss anything. Let's just go look at the Gart Brothers entrance here by Newsteaders. I just think this is so pretty, and I think that these mid-century modern light fixtures are also really nice, so I built those. And if I time travel, you'll see how much this changed. The mall entrance is still there. This is that Broadway Southwest, the building that we're in now. And you'll notice that they pulled the building back, but they didn't fill in the parking, so the parking got sort of opened up down there, which is probably a good thing. If I time travel, I'll be right up against the building. And right here is where Newsteaders ended, and that is merely the midpoint of the Broadway Southwest. I think the only thing left that I have to show is just for fun. I'm going to go back to the Blue Mall. We'll check out the fountain again because it's just so nice. You'll notice I did add like the sub fountains. There were like smaller little sprays there, so I added all of that. Now, I built a couple of camera modes, one of them being black and white, just for fun. It felt right. And I also made one that was sort of a vaporwave mode. And that might work a little better in the 1980s. Here's vaporwave mode in the 1980s. All right, let me hit pause. Back here to our presentation, I showed time traveling, historic photographs, anti-gravity mode, visibility controls. Awesome, I did it all. I just wanted to show a couple of progress and bloopers of the mall as I was building it. When I got the mall into the video game engine for the first time, there were no interior lights, and I thought this was just such a cool, dramatic shot. And when I stop the rendering of the mall, which takes about 40 hours right now for the whole mall to get rendered, but if I stop it in the middle, or if something goes wrong, it looks like the apocalypse is happening inside of Cinderella City. This one I just liked because it was nice to see the sun coming through the skylights there. I actually lost this effect because when I added the new skies, this sun was not compatible with them. So I lost the sun, but I gained a nice sky. I guess it's a give and take. I got to figure that out at some point. Getting those people into the game was actually quite a challenge. And at first, I wasn't mapping them correctly. So the idea is that the three-dimensional people should go where the two-dimensional people were. But in this case, I had the direction wrong. So it looked like the cutout guy killed the 3D guy. And at some point, I was trying to do the plants, and they're the same thing, where I'll map a real plant to the fake plant, and I accidentally mapped the people to the plants. So I ended up having a bunch of people hanging out in those planters, a planter party. And at some point, I got the folks to sit down properly. Getting them organized and sitting in the right direction and at the right height is a whole thing. So it felt good to get that done. And by the way, a note on that, I had to buy these people from a third-party creator. I didn't make them. I'm not in the business of making people. So I chose ones that were as close to period correct as I could, but I know that I should have some bell bottoms and other things. Let's talk about the future, a couple of next steps that I want to do here in the simulation. As I've mentioned, I want to add recordings to these animated people. So if you have a memory of Cinderella City that you'd like to share, you can call 7SinCity68 and record a voicemail, and I will use your recording in the mall. And I'll even put a little person in there. And if you want to share your name, I can put your name on there too. Eventually, I'd like to do a guided tour to prepare for possibly a permanent exhibit someday so that you can just watch somebody walk through the mall and maybe tie them to the historic photographs so you can actually learn about the history. I would like to add more content, more stores, more historic photos. There's lighting improvements. And I also have the idea of adding an alternate reality era, which I'll talk about shortly. And I also need to work on cross-platform support. You can only run this on a Windows machine, and I know people want to run it on VR machines, so I'm going to work on that. Eventually, I'll have a version 1.0 of the game, and I'll have to build a website to offer that. I'd also like to do a third era called the alternate reality. What if Cinderella City wasn't demolished entirely? What could it look like if I was given the entire site and said, go crazy? I think I'd like to, maybe some of it becomes open air, maybe some of it becomes like ruins in a park. I'd do a lot more greenery. That mall had a lot of concrete and not a lot of greenery. And I'd also like to restore some of it to the original design, almost as a museum exhibit. Okay, let's talk about saving the Englewood Civic Center. The building that we're in is the last remaining building from Cinderella City. As we all know, it was adaptively reused for the Englewood Civic Center in 2000. It's not included in the upcoming city center redevelopment, and it will be demolished. I wasn't happy either. So I felt that it was a waste of building material. This is 150,000 square feet of not very old building. So last year I designed an adaptive reuse proposal to improve the building and its surroundings. I propose that if they're going to move everything out of here anyway, why don't you put a food hall in the lower level and have some office or cultural or residential? You can even stick a hotel up there if you wanted to. I also propose that we should move the parking deck to the south in a new, maybe a multifamily building on the corner, and open this whole thing up so that you have sort of a nice promenade plaza here in front of the building. I talked to the redevelopment team, and it's just too expensive and too complicated to retain this outmoded building. So the very place that we're sitting here right now is going to be demolished probably in a couple of years. If you feel like it, you can also sign the petition anyway. I did get over 1,000 signatures. It's change.org/save Civic Center if you'd like to make your mark. Maybe just let them know how you feel. I also am starting something called the Villa Italia Project. I think Villa Italia is another interesting Von Frolic mall with a fascinating history. I've started a Facebook and an Instagram page to share photos and history of this mall. Currently, I have no plans to rebuild it yet because it's very complicated. It would actually be a lot harder than Cinderella City was, surprisingly. Okay, we've reached the end. I just want to note that Westward has covered the project several times, which I greatly appreciate. 5280 has also done some articles on the project. I even got a shout out from Governor Polis on Facebook, which was very nice. All right, if you'd like to connect, I'm available at the Cinderella City Project on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You can email me at cinderellacityproject@gmail.com. You can leave a memory at 7SinCity68. You can buy the project a coffee if you'd like to show your appreciation, and you can try the simulation if you're an intrepid mall fan at github.com. You can search for Cinderella City Project. And that's what I have for you tonight. Thank you very much.